Hey everybody, welcome on our channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto got harem with Jin, Yu and Tsunade. Part 4. If you are new on the channel, don't forget to subscribe our channel and like the video too. So without wasting any more time, let's start the story. As Naruto, Katara and Aang were forcibly guided to their bedchambers, not a single one of them didn't feel like they hadn't been jaded. Aang just wanted to see Katara happy, Katara herself just wanted to learn waterbending from a master, and Naruto felt cheated in the aspect that he never actually got to teach the dark-skinned girl anything. The sage could feel anger literally resonating from Katara's physical being, but then again it didn't exactly take a reincarnation of the Rakuto Sannin to tell that the girl was furious. When the trio finally arrived to what was more or less their prison for the night, all three were shoved inside roughly by Pakku, the door slamming behind in frustration on part of the old man. Katara sat angrily upon the nearest bed, shaking her head in disbelief at what had occurred. It didn't take long for any of them to notice they were not alone in the room however. Katara's brother Sokka sat in the corner on a stool with a look of discontent upon his face. "I'm guessing your little sunset flight with you didn't go so well, Sokka?" Naruto inquired. Sokka rolled his eyes and sighed heavily, dusting himself off and rubbing his temples in frustration. "Princess, you can be so confusing, sometimes during the flight she seemed interested in me to an extent and other times she kept ignoring me. Do all women need to give such mixed signals?" Sokka exclaimed, immediately regretting his choice of words when his sister shot him a glare so foul that it would strike fear into the heart of a saber-toothed moose lion. "I don't want to hear any complaints right now, Sokka, we have our own fish to fry," Katara practically hissed. Sokka looked at his sister was questioned before Aang sighed to break the tension. "Master Pakku caught us waterbending together, Katara and I as well as Naruto figured that whatever Pakku didn't see wouldn't hurt him, apparently however he either knew of our intentions or in the least followed us. Due to his beliefs he claims we've disrespected the whole tribe by doing what we did and he's going to bring all of us to Chief Arnuk tomorrow in an attempt to kick us out here," Aang solemnly stated. "Well that's just great guys, how am I supposed to get close to Princess Yu if we're all freaking banished?" Sokka exclaimed, landing down on a bed face first as his muffled groans emphasized his mood. The other three members of the room rolled their eyes and shot glances at one another. Katara wasn't particularly shocked that her brother wasn't seeing the bigger picture. "I hate to burst your bubble, lover boy, but I think a meeting with the chieftain discussing our collective banishment from this tribe may just be a bigger setback than you trying to win Yu's heart from that baka, Han." Naruto shrugged, leaning back in his respective bed lazily. He could see from the corner of his good eye that Aang was about to ask him a question, and since he most likely already knew the answer he decided to retort early. "It means idiot," Naruto said. "A fitting description for that arrogant jerk and for that crotchety old man as well," Katara huffed angrily. Aang couldn't help but sigh at the large mess the four were in. If they really were banished from the Northern Water Tribe, finding a waterbending master to tutor him would be nearly impossible. His group had flown more than halfway across the world for this, just to have their progress hindered by an old man clinging to sexist customs. "We should all get some sleep, I doubt when morning comes our awakening won't be exactly pleasant if that OG-san has anything to say about it," the sage grumbled lying back in his head and shutting his one functioning eye. Katara stroked her hair loopies out of her vision and nodded in agreement. "Naruto's right, as frustrated as I am it'll do none of us good to worry about our problems now, as long as morning is on the horizon, we should all get some sleep and brace for impact when the sun rises." Sokka moaned in frustration into his sheets, only to be shoved to the side of the bed by Katara, who took her place next to him. Granted, a brother and sister sharing the same bed was quite unusual for their own age and considered to be taboo if other things were to occur, but it wasn't like they had much room to begin, so they just had to make do for now. Katara herself was too angry to care and Sokka was too frustrated to care, so everything worked out for them on their end. Aang took his place in his own single bed, with a lemur-like creature darting into the room and curling up on his chest, something that momentarily surprised Naruto. Sighing deeply, Naruto wandered over to a nearby trunk and retrieved both a sleeping bag and a pillow from it, lying them both down on the floor, only to join them within a matter of seconds. "Well this is pleasant. As I said before kid, tuck up number 1. Too true. The only possible good thing I can think that come out of this is us whooping that old coot so hard it'll make his ancestors dizzy." Which is funny considering his ancestors probably didn't even exist before we did. "As you said yourself though, we should probably get some sleep, nothing can be solved by worrying right now." "Yeah, you're right, good night Kurama." "Good night Naruto." But tucked up way to start a new life. Admiral Zhao's vessel. Azula and her companions lay in their respective bed as the ship rocked back and forth against the lazy tide, all of them too tired to even feel seasickness at this point. She had already informed Zhao that the invasion was to be delayed for 3 days, something he originally argued heavily against only to be reminded who he was arguing with in the first place. While Azula herself would have normally agreed that waiting like this to harness such a worthy opportunity was a foolish move, Naruto is what made all the difference in the assault. A man who possessed such unknown power and ancient knowledge would be a critical asset to the Fire Nation in this time of war. She couldn't take the chance by having him be her homeland's enemy. Even if home was her home in the past, she still felt that he had the determination to side against anyone he felt like. Azula smiled to herself, knowing full well how the esteemed admiral of the vessel was most likely fuming at having to wait an additional 3 days to begin the invasion that he had already prepared for. Zhao was stubborn, but he wasn't stubborn enough to argue with her of all people, the prodigy daughter of the Fire Lord. Looking to both her left and her right, she noted the conditions of her friends in their sleep. Ty Lee's hair was down as it always during her naps, her frazzled hazel hair covering a lot of her face. The acrobat clung to her like some kind of stuffed animal, one hand around the front of her frame and the other hand looping around her back. Normally such familiarity with the princess of the Fire Nation would have called for execution, but for Azula, this was normal behavior on Ty Lee's part. It wasn't like they hadn't slept together before, whether when the younger or at their current age. Mai on the other hand was asleep as well, but in a much more peaceful, reserved stance than her friend adorned in pink pajamas. Her eyes were shut dimly, and her mouth was open ever so slightly, a small breeze of air expelling out of her slightly open maw every now and then. Azula herself had tried to fall to sleep, but was having a hard time doing so due to eagerness and wondering how her golden-haired companion was doing on his recon mission. It wasn't that she doubted his prowess after seeing what he was already capable of, just thinking how much of a valuable asset he was, and to be lost in a mission to spy on peasants made her skin crawl. She remembered that he promised her that no harm would come to him, and he'd come back like nothing happened to tell her of the defensive scenarios of the militia the Northerners had gained, and whether they were aware of the impending invasion. And they were was also the fact that Naruto himself wished to only target military outposts and defensive perimeters, not destroy the whole tribe as a whole to see victory. It was obvious he didn't want innocent blood on his hands, but he had told her that he was willing to make sacrifices despite his honorable demeanor. He merely did not wish bloodshed when it could be prevented. When she had informed Zhao of this new tactic along with having to wait an additional 3 days, she swore his head was going to implode out of frustration, much to her amusement. Much to her own dismay, she had been more or less pressured into visiting her uncle Iroh, who she considered to be almost as worthless as her brother. Sure enough, from what Azula had expected, he was as jubilant and as peaceful as ever, content with just making tea and talking about the upcoming battle, like it would just be a stroll through the park. It made her sick. Iroh was one of the few people who was sympathetic to her brother after her father literally branded his image within his son's own face, something her uncle had claimed was a step too far. He never said such thing openly to her father, of course, mainly he just mumbled such things to himself, or in many cases, he would try to comfort Zuko himself about what had occurred. Iroh had apparently heard of Azula's mystery companion from Zhao and has questioned her about inquisitively, something she immediately regretted upon not introducing the blonde to him earlier. She tried her best to accurately describe Naruto, but words failed her. It wasn't every day one person single-handedly redefines the way you look at the world. What could she have possibly said to describe him in a few sentences? That he was an ancient being that far surpassed the Avatar in age and in strength, and that his power was unknown as it was formidable. Azula had dismissed her uncle early on in the conversation, merely stating that Iroh had to meet Naruto himself to truly get to know him. Iroh seemed to accept that casually, something Azula was forced to roll her eyes at. She honestly had not thought her curious relative would have given up so easily. But her fears were soon brought back to the fray again as he began reciting ancient proverbs that dealt with the value of patience, to which she did not last more than a minute and left the stage quickly. Sighing heavily as her head sunk back into the pillow, she closed her golden eyes slowly as the darkness embraced her. Naruto, I hope you're having more fun than I am. Come back soon, losing you as an ally would be more than troublesome. I know you said you're loyal to our nation's cause, even if you have different ideas about, just don't be swayed by those weaklings and their pacifistic philosophies. Don't you dare give in, I've invested too much in you for you to go cold turkey on me now. The next morning. It hadn't been a minute past 8 o'clock when a rather loud racket awoke Ong's group, that sound being the practical kicking down of the chamber door where 4 misfits were more or less imprisoned. Sokka fell out of his bed with a shrill shriek, Ong jumped like a toad, Momo hissed similarly to a stray cat, Katara spat out an uncharacteristic curse, and Naruto merely groaned in frustration. It didn't surprise any of them to see who exactly their obnoxious alarm clock was. Master Pakku stood in the doorway with an incredibly potent glare encompassing his face, the same as the night before. Naruto just looked at the old waterbender and shrugged, chuckled a bit and shook his head in disbelief. Man, is there ever any time when you aren't pissy? I mean goddamn, I'd hope that you'd cooled off a bit from last night, but I guess that was expecting too much out of you, wasn't it? Naruto laughed mockingly, only furthering to enhance Pakku's anger. All of you get out of bed, I'm taking you to Chieftain Arnuk at once, I've already told him of your deeds, he will be your judge and jury. Pakku stated determinedly. Oh man, don't we even get breakfast first? Sokka whined, which only received a glare from Pakku and literally everyone else in the room. Sorry, I was just asking, Jeesh the southern warrior trailed off, lacing his boots as he prepared to meet the same fate as his friends. As the four gathered their footwear and readied themselves for what was to come, a sense of doubt could be felt throughout the room. Most notably the emotion came from the Avatars group, which Naruto could sense instinctively due his connection with the QB and his talent of being able to read people's minds through direct eye contact as a sage. His gaze wandered to Katara's azure eyes, which were encased with not only doubt, but with frustration and a hint of anger as well. I hope we can explain to Chieftain Arnuk that we meant no harm, especially when it comes to the traditions of this tribe, as wrong as they might be. It's going to be difficult to pacify the situation though, Pakku, a crotchety old man or not, still has quite a connection with Arnuk, he'll probably try to make us look like the bad guys in this scenario. We've come so far though, we can't just give up because some sexist old coot has a problem with me learning how to waterbend better, we need all the hands possible to fight the Fire Nation, one way or the other, regardless of tradition. I didn't come literally halfway around the entire world with Ong, just so we both could be denied this privilege, we've traveled far enough to earn the right to be taught. Naruto had read the Inuit girl's mind as he indirectly mined eye contact with her, shaking his head at the arrogance she had to face under Pakku's watchful eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't been disrespected as well, but it wasn't the same kind of dishonor. Discrimination of a warrior due to their sex was painfully unbearable to him, even under his days, as a shinobi ridicule of female warriors had sometime occurred, but it didn't seem as potent as the situation he was currently watching. I take it you plan to do something, kid. Like I have a choice, Kurama, even if I did, I wouldn't just try to defend my own honor, someone needs to stick up for her as well. And why does that person have to be you, exactly? Look at the amount of she's facing due to the customs of this tribe, it's inexcusable. A warrior of either gender should not be discriminated against because of their sexual identity, it's a lowbrow tactic only employed by cowards and ignorant fools. Don't you sense the potential within her? It does not take an observant eye to see that Katara flares with the same kind of prideful strength as Konoha's will of fire. If she is taught properly she can become a truly astonishing fighter. Matatabi was never judged by her gender by any demon, tailed or not. Us Biju do not condone or believe in that sort of discrimination that the truly revolting humans employ, even Shukaku was wise enough to know that a woman scorned could be hell incarnate. Then you see why I need to help her out then. Something you fail to grasp, kid, is that she most likely hates the Fire Nation and the people who hail from it. She does ally with the very being Azula described to us as being a cowardly, self-righteous, self-proclaimed altruistic messiah. Would teaching her truly be to our advantage, kid? I doubt it would be so easy to dissuade her from the Avatar's service, given the determination that bodes similar to Sarutobi Hiruzen. If we help her now, it might just provide us with another powerful opponent to fight against, another well-trained enemy to fight our homeland. I question how that is beneficial to us. Even if you manage to persuade her in due time to join us, which I'm getting the feeling that you're thinking of doing just that, how do we know that her conscience would not betray us in due time? That she would not strike us down from behind as a trained warrior, as an ally you trusted? I really would prefer not to be the harbinger of another Uchiha Sasuke of all things. She's nothing like Sasuke. Don't try to mar her honor by referring her to that fool. I know she's not like Sasuke now, what I'm saying is she could become another Sasuke in terms of going turncoat on us when we least expected and least needed it if she truly does decide to ally with us in due time. I won't judge her till all her cards are put on the table. Isn't that we did with Sasuke team? And look what happened with him. A good point, but Katara hasn't displayed murderous tendencies or an arrogant attitude. Her personality seems to be the exact opposite of Sasuke's. Things can change, kid. We must have faith in her regardless. I take it you'll personally deal with her if she becomes a true threat to us and our homeland after this incident follows through. Of course I wouldn't have it any other way, I learned my lesson with Sasuke. I'll give her 1 or 2 chances, but if she can't be dissuaded from following the Avatar, then I will do what I must. Even if it means killing her. I hope that is the last possible outcome, but yes, if it comes down to that, yes, I will take responsibility for the potential mistake that will arise. I will slay her myself need be if it is the only option left. You will her aid against Pakku then? As it should be. Very well then, it's your choice in the end, kid. Having been led to the royal chamber, the group of 4 led by Pakku begrudgingly looked up at Chieftain Arnuk, who bore a look similar to Pakku's, filled with skepticism, disappointment and perhaps anger as well. Lord Han, Yu's betrothed, sat on the right of Arnuk, whose gaze looked to be that of elders, but with a much more demeaning, judgmental look upon it. Yu herself sat on the left of her father, whose gaze was the only one who looked down with sympathy at the group, her stare capturing both the attention of Naruto and Sokka. Whether or not they would be able to talk to her again after the meeting had been adjourned was yet to be seen, with both male teens hopeful at the prospect. "You all know why you are here?" Arnuk asked. Sokka raised his hand gingerly, earning a sneer from Pakku, as the chieftain sighed heavily in response. "Yes, Sokka. Do you have something to contribute?" Yeah, I really don't know why I'm here. I wasn't even with them at the time this happened, I can't even bend at all to begin with." Sokka nervously chuckled, while both Naruto and Katara face-palmed at the boy's ploy on innocence. "Yes, you weren't with them, you were off on the Avatar's bison with my fiancé. Did you really think such impulsive familiarity and such general respect towards myself would go unnoticed, you loathsome cur?" Han practically spat, as Sokka glared back at the Lord with equal passion. "Hey listen buddy, all you and I did was take a ride on Appa's back, I was just trying to let her have some fun, you know." Sokka replied earnestly, as Han stood up and slammed his hands against his icy table. "Fun? She is the princess of this tribe and my future wife. She has no time for fun, what she has to do is not question her place as royalty and go off gallivanting with peasants like you." Han shouted angrily, to which Sokka stomped his foot towards the shouting noble in response, as Naruto noted Yu's distorting facial features that implied the beginning of an emotionally upset state. "Silence. Well, that is Sokka's charge brought forth by Lord Han, we have a much situation on our hands here. Pakku has informed me you three were waterbending late at night unsupervised. Not only is this direct dereliction of the rule that no foreigner may bend any element with supervision during their stay here, but Yuong and Naruto were waterbending alongside Katara as well, violating one of the most upheld rules of this tribe." Arnuk authoritatively stated, silencing both Han and Sokka at the same time. "Women are forbidden to waterbend in this tribe no matter the situation, it goes against our oldest and most revered customs. You three have gone under my notice and insulted our heritage, to which Master Pakku has made the demand that the Avatar and his companions leave the vicinity of our village at once, minus Naruto, who will be kept prisoner here for his continued influence against Pakku." The chieftain finished, to which Naruto chuckled lightly at, earning an increased glare from Arnuk, Pakku and Han in the process. Yu herself looked on with a worried stare, hoping that the blonde warrior would not further endanger himself than he already accomplished. "As I said to Pakku earlier, no prison you could hope to build could ever hold me, I cannot be contained like a mere animal, there is so much more to me than you realize." Naruto scoffed, as Han stood in anger to accost the foreign man. "Learn your place, whelp. Bars of ice and steel can hold any man, your bravado does you no credit," the haughty lord retorted. "At least I have the strength to back up my claims, unlike you, you little gnat." Naruto laughed, Han's face turning beet red in fury as Yu gasped at Naruto's boldness. No one had ever willingly insulted a noble in the royal chamber before, even less so to insult a noble at all. But to insult a lord within her father's chambers, be the challenger peasant, foreigner or even a fellow noble was simply unheard of. Enough. All of you know the major claim of offense in this scenario, with that said in mind why I should continue to allow any of you to remain amongst my tribe," Arnuk said. Katara stepped up first, willing to plead her case with the most obvious method of defense in mind. "You all know the legacy of the Avatar, and you know that Aang has yet to master the four elements, he needs such skills and power to fight the Fire Lord, would you knowingly condemn the whole world just because of your sexist customs? Sexist customs or not, they are our customs nonetheless, and you have violated them and betrayed our trust at the same time. What exactly do you expect me to do? Force Master Pakku to take Aang back as his student?" Arnuk asked matter-of-factly. "Yes please. Aang and Naruto have done nothing in this situation, they do not need to be punished just for bending alongside me regardless of your customs," Katara pleaded desperately. Arnuk scratched his chin in a moment of thought, coming to what he believed was a logical conclusion. "I do believe Master Pakku would be willing to accept Aang back as his student if you swallow your pride and apologize to him. She has nothing to apologize for, all we did was ignore your lousy tradition of hindering who and who can't be a warrior. In all due honesty, I find it most surprising that an honorable man like yourself would follow such demeaning customs, you are far above such things Arnuk, apparently you just have yet to realize." Naruto added in, as numerous guards approached him out of spite, holding spears to his throat to silence his disrespect. He merely sighed audibly at the violent gesture, biting his tongue for the moment. Katara herself looked up at the chieftain and Pakku with a look of disbelief, appalled about she was being more or less forced to do. Apologizing to such a chauvinistic old man was the last foreseeable outcome in her own mind, but if it was for Aang, for the good of the world, she needed to do it, no matter how distasteful it was. "Well? I'm waiting, little girl," Pakku added with a smug on his face. "That did it. No. Katara whispered darkly, the icy floor cracking against her anger. Aang and Sokka went to put one of their hands on the girl's shoulders, but they were quickly thrown off by Katara swinging her arms up in the air. No way am I apologizing to a sour old man like you. The now enraged woman shouted, nearby pots breaking through the fury of her angered waterbending. Arnuk raised his eyebrows while Pakku's face remained unchanged, all the while Naruto smirked at what was about to unfold. Meet me outside if you're man enough to fight me. Katara huffed, practically stomping out of the royal chamber, the ice beneath her feet cracking against her rage. You looked rather frightened and worried, noted to Naruto and Sokka's temporary concern, before the remaining three turned to face one another. Han on the other hand was less than pleased, a very grim look adorning his face. I'm sure she didn't mean that. Aang said nervously shaking his hands in a worried manner. Yeah, I think she did. Sokka added. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle, much to everyone's surprise. He shook his head back and forth in disappointment at the repeated arrogance of Pakku, almost stunned that such repeated stupidity could be allowed to continue. Looking up at Arnuk with a look of disappointment in his functioning left eye, Naruto shook his head solemnly and left the room to follow the now enraged Katara. Things are about to get interesting. Kurama looks like Katara is finally calling out Pakku team out on his idiocy. Thinking of partaking in their little bout, kid? Most likely against Pakku, I presume. Like I'd have it any other way, and yes, to answer your question. But finally we get to put our first arrogant fasshole in his place with some help, of course. I don't intend to hog all the glory, Kurama. Hopefully if this goes as I've planned we can help Katara take him down together. But we can handle him on our own, can't we, kid? Probably true, but Katara deserves to put this sexist old coot in his place, as much as I do for him, treating me with suspicion just because I'm a foreigner. We both have our reasons. I guess you're right, though we're probably going to have announce why we're helping Katara. I'm not even sure if the girl will want or help her accept it, and then there's the fact that Pakku will probably want to fight her one-on-one with no outside assistance. I never said I was giving either of them a choice, did I, Kurama? We both have our reasons to fight Pakku. I'm not just doing this to Katara, I'm doing this for myself as well. That old man has treated us poorly ever since our arrival. We have the right to challenge him just as much as Katara does. And what if he rejects both of your attempts to fight him? Then we'll just have to persuade him, won't we? Zhao's vessel. A meeting between Admiral Zhao and Iroh is being had, the two sitting down at a small table discussing the battle to come. I'm devastated to hear about Prince Zuko, just devastated. His demise is a great loss for the Fire Nation, despite the conflicts he had with His Majesty. Zhao commented almost casually. The Fire Lord will not be pleased when he learns who's responsible for this tragedy. I imagine the consequences will be quite severe. Iroh responds while he sips his tea elegantly. You know who was behind the attack, Iroh? They should executed for this dishonor against our country. The people behind the assault were Pirate Zuko, and I ran into them a while back. They wanted revenge against us. Unfortunately their second attack took my prince's life. A shame, truly a shame. I'll make an inquiry to our lordship to see if we can properly hunt down those dogs as soon as this battle is won. Have you reconsidered my offer, Iroh? I could use someone like you under my wing during this invasion. Your skills would be most welcome along Her Majesty Azula as well as her followers. Iroh sips his tea once more, calmly looking at the new admiral. Yes, I accept. It would be an honor to serve the new general. To the Fire Nation. Zhao laughs heartily, raising his glass to Iroh's. To victory. As the new military leader drinks his herbal refreshment slowly, thoughts trace in the back of his mind, Treasonous flashbacks of his attack on Zuko. HMPH, the fool expects nothing, as I thought. It would seem he knows not of my execution of that lout Zuko, as it should be, and even if he does suspect treason, he has no proof to base it on. Even the Dragon of the West would not be foolish enough to challenge an admiral personally given his promotion by our Fire Lord Ozai. This victory will show the world that we are to be respected and that I led the charge alongside Her Highness in one of our first great steps to victory in this miserable war. Back at the Northern Water Tribe. Naruto stood next to Katara, who had already taken off her coat and thrown it to the icy ground. The girl seemed to be mentally preparing herself for the battle to come, taking deep breaths of air in attempt to concentrate herself and not let her anger blind her when she came to fight against Pakku. Sokka and Aang had already made it outside and were of course trying to dissuade her from fighting against a waterbending master. Are you crazy, Katara? You're not going to win this fight. He's called a waterbending master for a reason. Sokka exclaimed, only earning a huff from his sister. You don't need to do this for me, I can find another teacher, it'll be difficult, but I'm sure someone out there can guide me properly in waterbending. Aang stated. Katara on the other hand would have no worded, flicking back her hair loopies and scrunching her fists momentarily. You two won't dissuade me from what I have to do. I know I can't win this fight, but I at least have to try, and I'm not doing this for you Ong, this is for me and my pride as a woman. Someone needs to slap some sense into this guy that a woman can fight just as well if not better than a man. Naruto turned his head casually towards the Inuit girl, looking at her with pause. I seek to aid you in this battle Katara, I have my own score to settle with this old man as well. You can't help me Naruto, it would ruin the whole purpose of why I challenged him in the first place. I'm going to prove to him a woman can stand on her own. Katara responded assertively. You misunderstand my intentions, I do not want to fight him just to aid you, he has insulted my honor as well. He has looked down on me just because I am a foreigner and not of this tribe's lineage, such xenophobic ignorance must be punished. Though I will admit, these sexist customs of his annoy me as much as you, as I have stated before many female warriors of Barashi were my better in the field of battle, as far as earthbending was involved, they earned their place as warriors above me. Naruto replied calmly. That doesn't change the fact that I want to fight him alone. Katara almost spat in anger, somewhat surprising Sokka and Ong. Regardless, we both have issues with him, we both want to settle a score with him, it is only natural that we ally ourselves to be Pakku's downfall. Before Katara could retort, Master Pakku walked smugly by both Naruto and Katara, passing nonchalantly in between them. Several onlookers had gathered alongside Ong and Sokka, including Chieftain Arnuk, Princess Yu and Lord Han, who all looked on with curiosity. Sokka's kin glared at the arrogant old man, burning into his very figure with her brazen eyes. Well? Aren't you going to fight me? Katara snapped viciously. Not even bothering to turn his head Pakku continued to walk past the enraged teenager. Go back to the healing huts with the other women where you belong, I will not degrade myself by fighting a woman. Katara tightened her fist and concentrated for a watery whip to form, using it to slap Pakku on the back of his head, cutting him ever so slightly. A large amount of gasps echoed from amongst the crowd, Lord Han stepping forward with a furious look on his face. That woman attacked Master Pakku. Seize her. Before anything further could occur, Pakku raised his left hand to motion the guards to stand down, turning slowly to face Katara. Fine. You want to learn how to fight so badly? Study Clo Pakku began to monologue aggressively, before being hit by a massive gush of water sent forth by Naruto, sending the older man spiraling across the ice. All eyes were on the golden-haired sage now, looking at him with either surprise or contempt. Pakku gained his ground slowly, somewhat stunned by the sudden attack, looking at the foreigner with sharp hateful azure eyes. Do you wish for me to kill you boy? Pakku rasped hatefully. You have not only insulted Katara's honor, but you have insulted mine as well. You have labeled me unworthy of my place here due to the sheer fact that I am a foreigner, your arrogant xenophobia must be put in its place. For your insolence I will fight alongside this woman, prepare yourself Oji-san, my name is Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto, and you are about to be humbled. Naruto stated aggressively, entering a fighting pose worthy of a charging saber-toothed moose lion. Pakku chuckled grimly, shaking his head in disbelief. The youth are so arrogant, believing your time to be the greatest age of all ages, you think that your time of life is greater than all generations before it, and for that you are all fools. I shall put you both in your place. Pakku shouted, entering his own battle stance as well. And we shall put you in the ground. Naruto roared back. Pakku extended both of his arms, creates two swirling streams of water from nearby pools, sending them both spiraling in the direction of the two youths. As Katara and Naruto brace for impact, the streams loop around them both and create a spiraling ring of water that forces them in Pakku's direction. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt either of you. Pakku declares, as the duo is forced ever closer to him. Naruto grits in his teeth in both determination and frustration, looking at Katara to make the first move. The Inuit girl nods slowly and spins in a 360, redirecting the water swiftly to her left, causing the sudden blast of water to hit Sokka, much to Naruto's amusement. Katara charges at Pakku who builds an ice ramp in defense, to which Katara slides up and lands on a nearby post. Naruto, who was running right behind Katara hits the ramp not a moment after with a powerful leaping punch, as his fist connects with the ice, the world seems to slow down, before the icy shield shatters into a million pieces. The sheer force of the punch sending Pakku spiraling backward, but not completely to the ground. Looking at Naruto with disdain, the sage leaps 15 feet into the air with his fist ready to come down on Pakku's head, only to be blasted away by a powerful stream of water from the older man. Pakku redirects his attention to Katara, who begins flinging torrents of water at him, which he easily redirects to his sides, and collects to form a stronger aquatic blast to fire at the girl, only for Katara to freeze her feet down and redirect the blast away. You can't knock me down. A small collaboration of the crowd cheers, much to Naruto's approval and Han's annoyance. Katara and Naruto both charge at Pakku again, ready to physically engage him combat. The master forms another icy shield, but it is quickly liquefied and tossed away by Katara's waterbending. The two youths begin to assault Pakku with a torrent of physical blows, which the elder tribe member begins to dodge elegantly, only to be gradually pushed back by the ferocity of the attack. Pakku backflips and whips another torrent of water towards the youths, whipping Katara into a nearby pool, while striking Naruto dead on in the chest, whose feet scrape across the ice as the aquatic elements push him backward in an attempt to regain balance. Naruto lurches forward against the wave, dispelling by throwing both of his arms forward, much to Pakku's surprise. He clasps his hands together, performs multiple signs, and then stretches both his hands forward while slamming his feet down in concentration. Suiten. Josho Warupamusu no Jutsu. Two great blasts of water that reassemble two spiraling tornadoes launch out of Naruto's hands with great force, so much so the sage is blasted back a bit by his own technique as his feet skid through the ice. Pakku's eyes widen as he extends his palms to disable the attack, all the while he is rapidly pushed back by the massive surge of water. The old man eventually manages to redirect at least 50% of each surging whirlpool to his sides, which crash against the icy floor, scarring the battlefield with their might. Unable to direct the other 50%, Pakku is launched backward and is sent skidding across the ice before quickly regaining his balance. Naruto, whose attack ended up pushing him back to the pool Katara was launched in, looks to the water to see that Katara has already risen from the shallows, with a furious look of determination on her face. Both look at each with confidence brimming in their eyes, nodding at one another before resuming their fighting poses. Pakku looks at them both with a look of beepiness and a bit of frustration, who is already well prepared for their next assault, despite Naruto's unexpected might. Katara summons a small pillar of ice from the water, her hand skimming across the top like a chef preparing to serve his meal. She sends out a multitude of icy discs at the master through manipulating the surface of the pillar, to which Pakku begins breaking many of said objects with his wrists and hands. Preparing to aid in the long-ranged assault, Naruto performs more hand signs and extends his index fingers, middle fingers and thumbs from both of his hands at the now defensive elder tribesman. Hyoten. Shado Onagetsu no Jutsu. A series of numerous small shards of ice begin to fire from Naruto's fingers as he extends both of his hands back and forth while launching the attack at his and Katara's aggressor. Between breaking the icy discs and not being able to keep up with the dozens of tiny chunks of ice being launched at him, Pakku is gradually pressed back as he continually pelted. A hopeful smile passes Katara's face, only for the old man to rise his arms up in frustration and disable the oncoming projectiles with ease. Naruto grits his teeth in anticipation and raises his right hand in the air. Water begins to spiral around at an alarming rate, and soon his entire arm is engulfed in water and is easily quadruple the size of any normal person's arm. Pakku notes the extreme bizarreness of Naruto's waterbending and almost lets his guard down as the youth literally flies right at him, the water from his makeshift aquatic arm literally propelling him at an alarming speed towards him. Suiten. Suseiken no Kai Josho. Pakku extends his right hand adamantly, preparing for the incoming attack and taking it full force in his palm. The torrent of spiraling water begins to burn against his hand, a smirk from Naruto is barely visible under Pakku's eyesight. The sage's smile turns to a frown of displeasure when the elder tribesman begins to bend his own jutsu against him. Pakku manipulates the water from Naruto's jutsu spiraling in the opposite direction at a rapid pace, sending Naruto literally flying backwards 20 feet through the air and colliding with a nearby wall, falling into the pool below him unceremoniously. Before he has time to smile at the youth's seeming defeat, a large wave of water connects with him, taking him by surprise. Katara continues to apply pressure to the torrent, only for Pakku to reverse it into an even larger torrent and sends it in her direction, blasting the adamant girl several feet away. Breathing heavily and tired, Katara rises to her feet nonetheless, an epitome of determination, alongside Naruto who emerges from the pool while craning his neck from his crash. Katara suddenly raises her hands and sends two massive snow pillars in Pakku's direction, much to Naruto's surprise about how willing the girl is to prove herself. Before either attack can connect, Pakku turns them both into a dust mist of snow almost instantly, looking on at the youths in amusement. "Color me impressed, you two are most certainly excellent benders indeed. I never thought I'd ever see a woman bend as well as you do, girl," Pakku proclaims, a small hint of respect in his voice. Katara pants past her exhaustion, looking up at the old man with a tiny look of spite still evident in her eyes. "But you still won't teach me, will you?" "No." Naruto smirks at Pakku's stubbornness, cracking his knuckles in anticipation. Katara bends over sharply and sends a wave of ice towards Pakku, to which he raises an ice pillar below him in defense, afterwards quickly liquefying it and charges straight towards the youths aggressively. Naruto launches himself at Pakku with an airborne spinning kick, only to be blasted to the left by a small ice pillar created by the waterbending master. In response, Katara launches another torrent of water against Pakku, to which he aptly freezes and slides across, striking her across the face as he passes and knocking her necklace off in the process. Pakku lands near the rim of a nearby pool, to which he summons all of its contents and freezes it into several large spears of broken ice, launching them all at Katara, who has yet to regain her footing. Looking up at she interprets to be her doom, Katara closes her eyes and waits for pain to rack her body, only for no such feelings of misery to come. Opening her eyes slowly, she sees the spears are being held in place by Naruto's outstretched palms, who adamantly holds Pakku's bending from attacking Katara any further. Nodding to Katara in a motion to attack, the sage crushes the spears by clenching his fists tightly, creating a snowy mist that Katara uses as camouflage to create a wave which she rides to attack Pakku with. The surprised waterbending master has little time to react to the sneak attack, which Katara disembarks from her wave and launches it at the elder man, crashing into him full force, yet Pakku refuses to lose any footing regardless. Naruto runs next Katara's side, nodding to her once more as a sign of comfort. The crowd is more or less silent at this point, too shocked to even add their own verbal output to the fight. No one in their entire tribe had ever once held their own against Pakku this long, yet these two were keeping him on the ropes this entire time. Katara, let's end this quickly. I may be strong, but I don't wish to continue this fight any further. He has much more experience than me when it comes to the water element, I just happen to pack more of a punch. Naruto exclaimed, looking at the matcha-skinned girl with fire in his eyes. She nodded back with all the passion she could muster, glaring at Pakku once more with determination and a bit of spite. Add your own bending to mine, Katara, this will finish it. The sage shouted, performing multiple hand signatures and then clasping his hands together at the very end. Suiton. Suryudan no Jutsu. A massive spiraling formation of water appeared around Naruto, which ringed around him multiple times before taking to the air to reveal an almost serpentine form. Using what strength she had left, Katara used her own bending to enhance the technique with a completely different of water encircling it to add a sort of aquatic armor to the already versatile attack. Much to everyone's shock, the snake-like formation took the form of a roaring aquatic dragon, baring its liquid fangs at Pakku with unbound ferocity. Standing side by side in their bending poses, the two youths launched their combined water serpent forward at Pakku full force. A faint roar is heard by everyone present, but it is dismissed as their imaginations overcoming them. Pakku extends both his hands forward fiercely, in hopes of at least redirecting or possibly fully controlling the aquatic monster back on its masters. Unfortunately, the elder tribesman has no such luck and is unable to control the combined chakra and kai from both Naruto and Katara, with the water dragon crashing down onto him unaltered at a monster space. A violent explosion of water and Pakku's muffled screams echo through the area. The collection of gasps from the nearby cloud spread discontent and disbelief through the wind as the mist clears, Pakku evidently still standing from the destructive technique. Naruto's eyes widen in disbelief, impressed that the old man can continue to stand after a direct hit from such a strong jutsu. Katara herself looks ready to fall over, most of her balance relying with leaning against Naruto's rugged arm. Pakku's eyes falter and his muscles twitch, his legs and arms shaking from fatigue and overexertion of his skills. The waterbending master takes 2 steps forward as Naruto and Katara both enter their fighting poses once more. After the 3rd step, the old man falls to his knees, his hands outstretched to the icy floor below him to keep him from falling completely. I submit your combined skills are more than a match for me. You two have won this fight, this battle is over. Pakku exhaustedly claims, stumbling to his feet out of weakness, bowing ever so slightly out of both respect and of fatigue. A small silence overtook the crowd, which was quickly replaced by the cheering and clapping of many of the peasants and their children. Aang and Sokka were the loudest amongst the group, with several of the nobles joining in as well, including both Chieftain Arnuk and Princess Yu. Some of the royals, however, clapped very hesitantly, while some didn't bother clapping at all, one of which was Han, whose expression had remained nearly unchanged since the fight started. As Pakku regained his stature, he calmly began to walk over to the youths who had defeated him. He felt a lump underneath his right following his 4th step. He looked down to see that he had planted his foot on Katara's necklace. While he hadn't damaged it, he did recognize it. The old man picked it up frailly, staring at it with a deep look of sorrow and regret. Katara almost immediately lunged out at Pakku in an attempt to grab it, which he barely managed to hold onto in the process. "Give me back my necklace," Katara hissed. This is my necklace," Pakku murmured softly, a look of bewilderment on Katara's face. "I made this necklace for the love of my life for Kanna," the waterbending master muttered, a tone of loss evident in his voice. "My grand was supposed to marry you?" Katara asked curiously. She had known her grandmother very well, she had very become her own mother figure after the death of her real mother at the hands of a Fire Nation foot soldier. But what was being said here made no sense to her, her own grandmother was supposed to marry Pakku. A grouchy, arrogant, chauvinistic bitter man whose reverence for tradition blinded his better judgment. I'd say she chose very poorly, given I see before me, I can't see why someone with the same blood as this warrior would ever want to be with someone like you. Naruto scoffed, earning a few gasps from both the nobles and the peasants. Even Katara glared at Naruto with just the smallest sense of disdain. She was grateful that he had fought alongside her to put Pakku in his place, and even more impressed by his skills, but that did not mean she condoned rubbing salt in the wound of a beaten opponent. Zhao's vessel. Having finished his long drinking session of herbal tea and well-aged wine with Admiral Zhao, Iroh continues to trek down the ever-looming hallways of the massive ship with a small speed evident in his footsteps. A foot soldier begins to walk past him, a small glint in his eye, signaling a trace of sorrow and of wounded pride. As the two cross each other's paths, they stop momentarily, not turning to gaze at one another. Our plan is working perfectly, Zhao doesn't suspect a thing, your identity is safe, for now. Iroh mutters. You didn't have to do this. The man under the helmet says in an almost sad tone, adjusting his mask so he could be heard properly. No nephew of mine is going to stow away on a ship without some backup. The somewhat intoxicated old man smiles, chuckling ever so slightly. Thank you, uncle. The incognito prince responds, adjusting his mask so his face is no longer visible. You should know that your sister, Princess Azula, is aboard this vessel, as are her companions, along with a new follower who I have yet to meet. Apparently this recent addition to the crew is causing quite a stir. Azula is here? Zuko practically spat, clenching his fists ever so tightly. He couldn't lose this chance. If she were to capture or slay the Avatar before him, it would just further mark him for shame. This was his one and only opportunity to appease his father, he couldn't give it to anyone else, especially his sister of all people. The sound of footsteps echoes through the hall, approaching the position of Iroh and Zuko with great haste. Quick, someone is coming, stay hidden until we get to the North Pole, and the Avatar will be yours. Good luck, my prince. Iroh whispers softly, as Zuko quickly exits through a door on his right and Iroh continues to walk ever forward through the spiraling halls. On the way down his path, Iroh crosses a particularly suspicious dark girl, who recognizes him near instantly and sports a friendly wave as she passes him. He nods with a small grin across his face, passing in an attempt to seem nonchalant. The girl looks around the hallways curiously, almost looking for something with her eyes peaked with suspicion. I could have sworn I heard him, he sounded so close. This ship must be getting to me, I need an aspirin. Northern Water Trive. I carved this necklace for your grandmother when we got engaged. I thought we would live a long, happy life together, I loved her. Pakku murmured softly. As he clutched onto the necklace tightly, he felt a hand on his shoulder. He looked over his shoulder calmly to see Katara's face now devoid of anger, but more filled with pity than anything. But she didn't love you, didn't she? It was an arranged marriage, my grandmother wouldn't let your stupid customs run her life. That's why she left, it must have taken a lot of courage. Katara spoke adamantly, earning a small smile of respect from Naruto in the process. Tears began to trail down Yu's eyes, to which she wiped them clean with her noble gloves, before anyone could notice her inherent sadness. Sokka was the only one to catch a glimpse of her sorrow, to which he tried to comfort her by holding her hand, only to halt such an action after a violent gaze from Han. Naruto walked forward as both Pakku and Katara turned to face him, and to Pakku's surprise, he bowed ever so slightly. As a warrior, you have earned my respect, Master Pakku. You are truly an adept waterbender, even though I dare say my own strengths back more power than yours do, I cannot deny that you most likely have more skill over water than I do. I do not hate you, Oji-san, but I urge you to consider bringing Katara under your wing. Though our semblance of teamwork is what defeated you, it required two to bring you down, not one, and Katara was the first one to challenge you, not I. She has proven her worth as a warrior and as a woman, far more so than most I expect. I am already satisfied with this outcome, the honor you insulted has been restored upon your defeat. If there is anything more I would ask of you, it would be to remember that while tradition must be revered, in time everything must change, regardless of how old it is. In times of war, you must look to all those who stand by you, and not discriminate by who is and who is not a man. Katara has proved such a rule defunct. I trust in your greater wisdom, Pakku-sensei. Assuming a respectful pose, Naruto bowed in a much more customary manner, truly wishing to show respect instead of mocking the elder man now. Looking at both the mysterious lad and Katara, he smiled slowly and bowed to them both out of respect. Katara joined in their unison, to which of the three had shown their respect for one another, not just as men and women, but as warriors alike. A mock clap of slow repeated sounds granted the attention of both the three and of the rest of the crowd, nobles and peasants alike. Han almost arrogantly stepped forward, a smug smile adorning his face. Naruto glared underneath his mask as both Sokka and his sibling showed a similar look of contempt for the haughty noble as he approached Master Pakku almost casually. Well, this has been an interesting comedic play. I believe it's time for it to be brought to an end, wouldn't you say, Master Pakku? With your permission, Chieftain Arnuk, I'd like to have these four properly escorted out of this tribe. Han chuckled haughtily, earning a resounding glare from most of the peasants as well as Ong's entire company. But we won this fight. Does this not demonstrate that we have earned our place here? Katara practically spat. Han rolled his eyes and shrugged, cracking his necking and sighing heavily afterwards. It may have earned the place of any Northern Water Tribe member, but keep in mind that despite whatever skills you both possess, you ultimately just a foreigner and a mere woman. Han stated casually, to which a resounding wave of boos from the nearby crowd of peasants clearly showed their disapproval at the actions of the lesser lord. And besides, there's still the fact that your loathsome lout of a brother has not properly paid for his crime in showing such familiarity with my fiancé. You four should consider yourselves lucky that I don't have you imprisoned for such impertinence. Han laughed arrogantly, to which Sokka blew a raspberry in his direction, much to Yu's amusement, as she tried to stifle a giggle. Katara stepped forward aggressively, making Han back up quite a few steps at the obviously re-angered girl. And what of Ong? Would you cast us out without being tutored by Pakku in order to properly master waterbending? He's made it perfectly clear that he has to master all four elements in order to defeat the Fire Lord. Would you doom the world because of your petty pride? Katara practically shouted, to which Han straightened his jacket and flung his hair back flamboyantly. That is an exaggeration at best. Surely the Avatar can find a waterbending master outside of our illustrious tribe, as difficult may be to a person matching Pakku's qualities. I have no doubt it is indeed possible. As for the journey of finding such a person, you and your brother should have obviously thought more about the consequences of your actions before flying against our traditions. You both should have known your place. The Lord almost chuckled, strolling casually over to his chieftain as Katara resisted the urge to run up to Han and slug him. Well, Chieftain Arnuk. Should I give the order to expel them, or do you want that honor? A pleasure like that I would not dare deny you. Han said smugly. No, I believe they've earned their place here. Arnuk grinned widely, as Ong's group couldn't help but smile brightly as the nearby citizens cheered in approval. Even many of the nobles clapped at their chieftain's decision with gusto. Han, on the other hand, was less than pleased, his mouth gaping in a disgusted sense of awe. But my lord. These strangers have dishonored one of our most ancient of traditions. Are they to be unpunished for such impertinence? And what of the slovenly fool of this woman, who has shown such familiarity with your daughter, is he to be forgiven as well? Han shouted angrily. Hey, I'm still standing over here, you know. Sokka commented nonchalantly. Arnuk sighed heavily, walking over to the three warriors who had just done battle, his eyes mainly fixing on Katara's. Maybe it's time that we look past such traditions. Perhaps in the future both men and women of our tribe can stand as one. Katara has certainly proved a woman can hold her weight in the battlefield. Many of the women of the crowd gave a nod of approval at Arnuk's gesture. Even the most royal females of Han's escort seemed to bend to such a notion. The small lord, on the other hand, was growing ever more frustrated by the minute. Chieftain Arnuk, I beg of you to reconsider. The actions of one woman, in which said female is a peasant amongst all things, cannot be allowed to tear down our customs just because of one petty victory, which was not even earned fully on her part due to foreigners' intervention. Esteemed Master Pakku, please try to talk some sense into our lord. Clearly you of all people see the reverence for the traditions at hand. Arnuk merely shook his head in a disappointed fashion at Han's rambling. Even some of the lesser lord's own followers now bore looks of disapproval on their faces. Pakku stepped forward ever so slightly, his mouth twisting to find the right words. Perhaps, Lord Han, it is we men who have been wrong all this time. If a woman like Katara truly exists among us, who are we to judge them for their gender? Perhaps a warrior's spirit cannot be judged by such things after all. I feel we men who have led the tribe for generations have made a fatal mistake. These two have taught me that through their passion in battle, that I have been wrong all this time, that my callousness and reverence for chauvinistic traditions cost me a person who I truly loved. It is we who must change, Lord Han, not them. If anything, I feel you could learn something from them as well. Pakku stated proudly, putting his arms on both the smaller and taller youths before him. A resounding cry of approval from both the nobles and peasants filled the air, even earning a round of applause from Chieftain Arnuk himself, much to Han's shock and anger. I couldn't have said it better myself, old friend. Arnuk noted calmly, a smile crossing across Pakku's face. Han stomped his foot in anger and then threw his arms up in the air like a wild animal in frustration. You're throwing one of our oldest commandments away just because of this girl. Have you both gone mad? Don't tell me you actually plan to take this woman under your wing, Master Pakku. Pakku sneered at Han angrily, frightening the pitiful man momentarily before he regained his footing. As a matter of fact I am. Both the Avatar and this astounding young woman are hereby welcome as my students. Han shook his head angrily in disbelief, turning to his chieftain. And what about this slovenly peasant presuming such familiarity with my future wife and your daughter, Chieftain Arnuk? Are we to let such perversions of an engaged noble, your daughter, slide easily as well? A snowball then connected with the side of Han's face, which practically melted upon impact due to the sheer anger of the Lesser Lord. He looked at Sokka in a state of fury, who was twiddling his thumbs and whistling to avoid suspicion, though the muffled laughter of both the peasants and royals made it obvious he was the assailant. Chieftain Arnuk looked at his daughter sternly, who flinched from seeing the resounding gaze of her father, staring into her very being. My daughter, has Sokka made any attempt to physically upset and/or violate you? Arnuk asked in almost dangerous tone, to which an audible eep of dismay was heard from Sokka's direction, while Long himself couldn't help but snicker at his friend's fright. Yu waved her hands in almost a frantic motion, as if trying to swat away invisible ice flies. Of course not, father, Sokka is a good man, he only wanted to make conversation with me outside of the royal hall, personally I found a lot of it most riveting. Sokka scratched the back of his head in embarrassment, trying to hide his clearly visible blush amongst the crowd, much to his sister's amusement. Arnuk nodded slightly, putting his hands on his waist in a completed manner. Well then, I guess that settles it. The chieftain declared, making Han nearly fall over in the snow out of frustration. You're just going to take her word for it. She could be telling a fabricated version of what really happened to protect the Avatar's company. Han exclaimed exhaustedly. Arnuk's eyes narrowed aggressively, a look of anger present on his face. He took 5 resounding steps forward, each one making Han back up anxiously. Lord Han, are you trying to imply that my daughter is a liar? No, of course not, my lord. I'm merely suggesting that. Han. Yes, my lord. Be quiet. Han stood by in silence, shocked at how his own chieftain was agreeing in terms of defending those who had gone against their traditions. Not only that, but he was defending a peasant who was attempting to go beyond his place and presume familiarity with his own fiancée. Such ignorance couldn't go unpunished. By now most of the citizens had begun to wander off, feeling the matter was adequately solved. Even most of the nobility from both the Northern Tribe itself and of Han's own company had already started returning to their stations, leaving any support the Lesser Lord hoped to gain as a now non-existent advantage. Yu, Ong and Sokka walked next to each other past an angered Han to their friends, Yu sharing a moment of serenity with her father, as Sokka and Ong both congratulated Katara and Naruto for a battle well fought. Naruto's eye seemed fixated on both Yu and Han, looking at both of them through peripheral vision in an attempt to study them. Naruto walked forward out of the group that had concealed him, gathering the attention of the people he left behind and of the still enraged Han. His azure eye stared into Han's very being, studying him even further than before, almost judging him. What? What is that you want, foreigner? Han spat venomously. Naruto shrugged and shook his head from side to side nonchalantly, looking at Han with a sense of contempt and disappointment. You are Yu's betrothed, are you not? Naruto asked sternly, to which Han gritted his teeth in anger in response. You damn well know I am. Han shouted. May I make a suggestion? Naruto stated. And what is that? Act like it. A resounding ooh sound resonated from Sokka's direction, which was quickly silenced from a blow to his arm from Katara. A noticeable tension was evident in the air. Han's eyes were filled with enough contempt to try to burn through Naruto's mask, but the strange visitor's stance would not falter. Growling in frustration, Han drew his sword from its scabbard, pointing it directly at Naruto. A series of collective gasps from passing nobles made the event known to others of the oncoming confrontation, and soon enough a crowd of royals had gathered around to observe what would occur. Han, stand down. As your chieftain, I demand you relinquish your arms against our new friend and ally. He has earned his place amongst this tribe. Arnuk yelled in an authoritative tone in hopes to subdue the practically enraged Lesser Lord. Yu herself now looked on frantically, not wanting the peculiar but wise man to be injured by her overprotective and overactive fiancé. Han shook his head in rage, glaring at Naruto even further with additional spite. My chieftain, you will have to forgive me, but I cannot stand down now. I will not surrender my arms to this foreigner. He has aided those who would stand against our traditions, and now he insults my honor as Yu's betrothed and as a warrior. I cannot abide by such arrogance, he must be punished for his stupidity. Naruto sighed lightly and stepped forward 3 spaces, raising his right hand up in the air as a swirling fixture of light engulfed his palm. After the luminescence had disappeared, a katana was revealed to have taken its place within his hand. It appeared to be of fine craftsmanship, a silver ivory handle accompanied by a gleaming white blade that shone as brightly as the snow. Naruto swung the sword from left to right twice before pointing it in Han's direction with gusto. Much of the crowd was perplexed at the sudden summoning of the sword. It surely hadn't accompanied the youth on his back or even his sides, it just popped right out of thin air. How the heck did he do that? That's no type of bending I've ever seen or heard about before. Such were Aang's thoughts, though they would remain in his own mind, unheard by Naruto's mentality. This is my mother's sword, the Onibacho. It was passed down through her family for generations, each next of kin to the royal bloodline would inherit this blade to protect and strive for the future of the Uzumaki clan. More than half of my heritage itself rests with this silver blade, and it has taken more lives than any normal sword ever has, from both my ownership and from those who wielded it before me. It is a sacred weapon made of silver, ivory, blood, sweat and tears. You of all people are not worthy to face it in battle, yet you have demanded for me to engage you in the fight. If you truly wish to fight me, then I accept your challenge, but you must come at me with everything you have as a warrior, prove to me that you are indeed worthy of being used betrothed, as I suspect that she deserves far better a partner than you. None of the nobles had time to gasp or feign embarrassment for Han, who had already charged off madly against Naruto with his sword held high, screaming like a maniac the entire time. Arnuk and Pakku looked at each other briefly during Han's charge, perhaps a bit of humility would do the Lord good. Naruto sighed heavily as Han continued to run at him, his stance was beyond sloppy, he could literally point out 12 different things Han had done wrong at the very start. But no wasn't the time to critique him, it was time to humble him. Han came down with a strong but clumsy downward swing, to which Naruto merely sidestepped the attack and stuck his right foot out, sending Han tumbling to the snow below with an unceremonious thud. The infuriated man didn't stay on the cold ground for long, grabbing his sword in a frantic manner as he rose while slashing upward near Naruto's neck. Moving back ever so slightly, the blonde warrior dodged Han's initial attack and then continued to parry every other attempt to skewer him while holding his mother's sword with only his right hand. It was becoming fairly obvious that Han had little training in actual swordplay, perhaps the nobleman had only carried his weapon for show and to look intimidating in hopes of bluffing of any attackers. Even so, the angry Inuit's current attempts to injure him were pitiful at best, he was even less than of an average fighter than Naruto himself had anticipated, the sage hadn't fought opponents with such mediocre skills in a long time. Han lazily spun around to cut Naruto in half with a 1/8 slash, only to find that when he turned his opponent wasn't in front of him or defeated, in fact, he had vanished. Several collective gasps made it obvious the mysterious youth was still present, to which Han looked up to see Naruto balancing himself on the sword used to attack him, while his azure and viridian eyes mocked the royal with a look of disappointment. That's impossible. And no normal person should be able to, Han began to exclaim, before Naruto's jumped ever so slightly and delivered a stiff kick to the lord's face, sending the now almost paranoid royal skidding across the ground, his blade landing next to him. As Han regained his balance, he saw Naruto land in the spot where he was previously, who now flashed a non-visible smirk behind his mask. I know what you were going to say, Han, and no, it's not impossible for a normal person to do what I just did. All I did was rebalance my weight so you wouldn't feel it on your sword, that way I wouldn't crash into the ground and you wouldn't immediately notice me. Naruto stated. Start talking sense. Han yelled, grabbing his sword amongst the snow, once more charging like a madman, earning a collective sigh from Pakku, Arnuk and Naruto at the noble's lack of tactics. Naruto didn't even have to attempt to block most of Han's swings now, most of them were missing now, since the boy had become so consumed by his anger. The attacks that did connect with Naruto's Onibacho were so unfocused that the sage had barely noticed the swords made contact at all, even less so damaging one another. Yu's betrothed attempted to cleave Naruto in half with a small running slash, in which the sage bent his body downward at just the right angle, so the blade ended up cutting only a few of his bangs. As Han turned around to strike again, a sturdy powerful backhanded fist connected with his face, Naruto had only turned his body halfway to deliver the attack, yet Han still spiraled to the ground the same as before. Han coughed a bit of blood, crimson water leaking onto the snow below, something that Arnuk and Pakku noted with concern. Naruto raised his left hand to keep them at bay, assuring them that Han was in no immediate danger. The infuriated prince hadn't taken any damage to his ribs, the bloody spit up was merely from a now fractured nose and a busted lip. That was a light punch at best, Han, I didn't think you'd suffer this much damage already. Good thing I put even less effort in that kick that I booted you with earlier, or else your face might have caved in on itself. Naruto smugly stated, as Han growled trying to regain his balance. Groggily rising to his feet, Han held his blade loosely as the hilt rattled in his hands, an evident sign of his fatigue and frustration. Raising Onibacho to his own level, the golden-haired sage smirked at the now exhausted warrior before him, insinuating that he would make the first move now, rather than defend or counterattack. Han leapt towards Naruto in aerial bound, his sword coming down from the sky to meet with Naruto's mask. Outstretching his hand upward in almost crescent motion, Naruto's silver blade met with Han's ever so briefly, and the warrior soon crash rolled to the ground behind the sage soon after his attack. The noble quickly began checking himself for even the slightest cut by the foreigner's katana, intent on making sure he was not too badly injured to continue what he perceived as a battle still underway. Much to his delight, there was not a mark to be found on his body, despite the first true attack of the man with the sun-kissed hair. "Ha! Your first true attack against me and you miss. Looks like all you could really do was dodge and retaliate properly." Han spouted haughtily, a forced mock chuckle escaping his lungs, which was quickly ended upon hearing no retaliation from his silent opponent. "I didn't miss, Han. You've lost this battle, completely and utterly," Naruto said somberly, raising his hand that held Onibacho up in the air once more, and like before how the sword initially appeared, it vanished a luminescent white light. Before Han could respond, the warrior noted a slight creaking sound coming from his sword. Upon inspecting it further, a thin but plainly visible line was drawn across his blade. And like clockwork, half of the blade slipped off from the rest of its steel without a sound, hitting the snow with a light pathetic thud. Many of the nobles, regardless of whom their allegiance was to serve, nodded their heads in approval and started to clap and applaud this foreign warrior for his impressive swordsmanship, which Han took to heart and his icy gaze fixated on Naruto even further. The sage didn't bother to even turn his head to look in Han's direction, dismissing the now defeated man as a fallen adversary at best. "All I needed to truly defeat you, Han, was one attack, just one. Your steel has broken just as easily as your pride, and you have proven my suspicions about you correct. On in the inside and on the outside, you are an ugly person. Your consistent chauvinism, lack of respect for others, and constantly expecting to be weighted hand and foot are some of your most fatal flaws, but above all, you do not truly care for Princess Yu, who deserves far greater than you." Naruto spoke almost solemnly, as Han gritted his teeth in absolute fury. Yu, on the other hand, was almost elated that someone had spoken for her in such an honest way without fear of ridicule, and that person had such an admiration and respect for her as a woman and just as a princess. "What right do you have to judge me? You're nothing but a lousy foreigner." Han spat hatefully, a look of disapproval and shame evident in the eyes of his noble entourage. "Even now you fail to grasp the obvious, you do not even try to understand, do you? If you truly cared for you, that you truly, deeply loved her, you would have been able to defeat me. That is what gives me the right to judge you as a coward. It is not your lack of strength as a warrior, your consistent chauvinism and xenophobia, or even your spoiled piss-poor attitude. It's that you lack the passion to show that you claim to care for a woman that you do not truly love or respect." Aang and his friends looked upon Naruto with respect. Even Sokka had come to admit that the man who stood in front of him was much more trustworthy than he had initially thought. Yu was practically in tears, touched that a man so powerful and wise obviously sought better for her. "Chieftain Arnuk, may I make a suggestion?" Naruto quipped, earning the attention of the somewhat shocked leader. "Yes, Naruto. What is it you'd like to say?" Arnuk responded calmly. "I suggest finding your daughter a more worthy man to marry, perhaps one who would truly love her, rather than just seeking his own fortune. Better yet, have her decide who she wants to marry. Someone like you deserves to make that choice on her own. We have both seen what tradition has brought her, and the result is more than disappointing." Naruto sighed heavily, Han's hatred practically melting the snow around him in response. There was a moment of silence in the crowd, many of whom were too shocked to think that the foreigner would make such a request, even following a successful duel with a lesser lord. Arnuk cupped his chin in thought for a few moments and then turned his gaze to Naruto once more. "I will consider your words highly, Naruto. Clearly you have proved today that some of our traditions are indeed a weakness, an oversight we cannot dare to overlook any further." The chieftain replied wholeheartedly, earning an emotional gaze from his obviously elated daughter. You could never truly emphasize how much she truly did not care for Han, but now that there was the possibility that her father would let her choose her own husband, how could she not show happiness? One person less than jubilant of course was Han himself, whose flames of anger burned even brighter than they ever had before. This foreigner had bested him in combat as a warrior in front of his betrothed and his own entourage, verbally accosted him in front of his peers, and even got his betrothed's father to think about reconsidering their union. It was the ultimate insult, it couldn't go unpunished. Han picked up his halved sword and ran towards Naruto like a madman, screaming in anger the entire way. A series of collective gasps and even shouts of horror filled the air, alerting an already on guard Naruto to his defeated opponent's charge. "Naruto!" Those were the shouts of many, including the Avatar's entire group, along with a now distraught Princess Yu, who could only watch in horror as her near-rabid betrothed closed the gap with himself and Naruto between every passing second. Turning his head ever so slightly to see his oncoming attacker, Naruto turned his body fully to face Han, but strangely enough did not raise his arms to defend himself. Han's halved blade came down on Naruto's opaque mask, slicing it down near the middle section in a maddened attempt at vengeance. The entire world seemed to slow down for everyone except Naruto of course. The skull-like mask, while obviously damaged, did not completely shatter, only showing a large crack rather than breaking off into two separate pieces. For just a moment, Han thought he had injured his mysterious enemy in at least some way, but was heavily distraught to see the now glaring azure eye looking down at him in fury. Before anyone could respond or try to restrain Han further, a stiff punch connected with Han's face once more. This one sent him skidding at least 7 times across the ground, an evident amount of force put in the attack, much more so than any present in the duel beforehand. Naruto walked ever so calmly to the now twitching body of Han, picking him up by his collar to reveal a now heavily damaged face, complete with a broken nose, swollen eye, busted lip, and several teeth absent in a now crooked smile. "I actually put a little bit of strength into that one, Han. How does it feel to have some of your teeth knocked down your throat?" Naruto rasped violently, his azure eye slowly turning into a slit, though from the angle only Han could witness the change. Coughing up some of his blood onto Naruto's mask, the sage put the lesser lord gently on the ground before taking 2 steps back, making multiple hand signs before stating his technique. Raising his right hand gently in the air, the sage only let out a faint whisper. "Suiton. Akuaburito no jutsu." Katara and Aang's eyes widened in remembrance of the attack, yelling out to the sage to not strike a potentially fatal blow. Their cries went unheard by Naruto's determination, a blade of condensed water forming at his fingertips. Bringing the liquid sword down with as Naruto walked towards Arnak casually, Han could be seen shouting in utmost pain, his body splashing amongst a now reddening snow. The hands he had used to strike the sage from behind now littered the ground, 2 bloodied stumps had replaced them in their stead. Naruto merely looked at Arnak once from behind his mask, an icy flare evident behind his eyes. "Arnak, summon your healers to assist Lord Han, he will most likely die of blood loss if you do not." Naruto casually quipped, walking by a now shocked group who had just come to respect him. The chieftain nodded slowly and corralled his best healers to assist the distraught lesser lord, while the sage continued to walk down the steps as if nothing happened. Yu's face bore a look of a horrified amazement, shocked that any person could control water in such a way, and even more stunned to think that any man would display such violence upon another. As the golden-haired man began to fade from the scene, Katara and Aang both nodded at each other in agreement, to which they began to jog after the vanishing sage. It wasn't long before they caught up to him. The unique stranger stood on a small bridge too near the urban areas nonchalantly, acting as if nothing had happened. This disturbed Aang greatly, to think that any person could perform such a violent act without batting an eyelash. Angrily approaching him, the Avatar's usually gentle eyes glared at Naruto with a determined amount of anger present within them. "That wasn't necessary, Naruto, you went way too far." Aang shouted furiously. Katara now sported a small glare herself, despite having come to initially respect Naruto for his power and general character. Naruto turned his head slowly, his one good eye making contact with Aang's vision. "Did I? Or did I not go far enough? The fool needed to be taught a lesson in both respect and humility, I just happened to give it to him." "You've crippled him for life," Aang retorted. And such is the lesson of a fool who learned his lesson too late. Even in defeat, he failed to understand the concept of humility, even attacking me while my back was turned. The masked stranger replied casually, truly not giving a damn that he had crippled Yu's betrothed. Katara stepped in front of an angered Aang, caring to voice to her own opinion to the unusual man. "I can understand wanting to teach Han a lesson in humility, ancestors know he earned it, but you went a step too far in teaching him such a lesson." Katara calmly stated, surprising Aang greatly that his friend was managing to keep her cool more than he was despite his training as a monk. Naruto turned full circle to matcha-skinned girl, looking her deep in her sapphire blue eyes sternly. "Traitors, cowards and fools are of the same category, Katara-chan. They need to be put in their place before endangering the lives of others. This was a lesson I learned far too late back in Barashi. If you fail to teach those who would strike you when your back is turned that such actions will not go unpunished, they shall continue to injure you and the ones you love. This I cannot abide by, not ever again." The younger teen's eyes widened at Naruto's cold words, not exactly sure what to make of them. In truth, he was probably right about said traitors, but enacting on such a belief without hesitation or remorse seemed far too brutal to them both. "Couldn't you have just forgiven him?" Aang pleaded desperately, trying to appeal to Naruto's humanity. The sage shook his head, folding his arms elegantly. "Perhaps, but if I had, I may have doomed another to befall the same fate of cowardice that Han attempted to invoke upon me. Not as many are as strong as me, or as lucky, they most likely would have been disfigured by his brazen stupidity otherwise, and I cannot be responsible for such maiming on my accord if I could have done something to prevent it in the first place." Naruto responded factually. Aang was at a loss for words, never before had he come across someone with such a cold, brutal even if factual philosophy. Everything Naruto was claiming to believe in went against his own beliefs, the training of the ways of a monk that he had learned from his dearly departed master, Gyusto. Even if Naruto was truly right in such matters, did it truly give him the right to exercise such a philosophy? Enforcing respect through fear is the way of the Fire Nation, not of a savior. Your own beliefs border awfully close to the ones who have tried to enslave this world. Katara menacingly stated, earning a surprised glance from Naruto. Truly? And what exactly have they done to ensure dominion upon you all? The last I heard they sought to unify the four nations, hardly what I'd call villainous. Naruto stated curiously, as Katara and Aang both displayed looks of shock. What have they done? What haven't they done? The Fire Nation has engaged the rest of the world in a pointless, self-serving war started by Fire Lord Sazin over 100 years ago. Thousands of innocent people have been butchered by their hands over a self-entitled sense of leadership that they have the right to rule over everyone. Katara sneered angrily. This whole unification experiment of theirs started by the Fire Lord of 2 generations past was nothing more than a military front to ensure dictatorship over the entire world. There never was any attempt at joining the nations together, all they wanted was to rule everyone with an iron fist. The Inuit girl furiously exclaimed, obviously passionate about the aforementioned topic. Aang stepped in front of Katara, ready to let his own opinion be known as well. The unification Fire Lord Sazin sought was a mistake. The four nations cannot exist together with one another, they must remain separate. Aang claimed. Are you sure they cannot be brought together? Or do you say this only because previous avatars failed to accomplish such a feat in the past, Avatar Aang? Naruto quipped. I say so due to the fact that I've come to learn since my disappearance 100 years ago. This world has been at war with the Fire Nation ever since. Maybe Sazin originally did want to unite the four nations, but whatever his goal was, it has long since disappeared with the Fire Nation's current policies. I've seen what they're capable of doing, Naruto. They decimate any of those who do not obey them, as well as murdering and enslaving those who would defy them without a second glance. They do not even try to look for peace. Aang proclaimed loudly, Naruto's eyes widening in response. I've come to learn that my own people, the air nomads, were slaughtered by Sazin's command under the suspicion that the next avatar would arise from their ranks, as many of the avatars had done so before. My entire heritage was destroyed, and my people were the victims of genocide under the orders of an arrogant, corrupted old man who left my predecessor to die. The avatar darkly stated, a concerned look from Katara noted itself in his direction, a soft hand being put gently on his shoulder. Naruto's eyes remained folded, a look of skepticism and questioning hidden under his mask. The wheels in his head were turning, grasping the fact that if what the Avatar and Katara claimed were true, his nation had indeed fallen from grace. Dictatorship. Genocide. Such qualities were not of the High no Kuni. He remembered, it had become apparent that much had changed. He remembered that Azula had promised to tell and show him the policies of the current Fire Nation, but if what Aang claimed was true, he didn't want to see the rest. If such tales of his nation's corruption were indeed correct, changes needed to be made, serious changes. Enforcing loyalty through fear and tyrannical rule was all too similar to Uchiha Madara and Shimura Danzo, two men far too misled in their own beliefs that would let so many others suffer to attain what they desired. If the current Fire Daimyo was at all like he was being described to be, he either needed to be dethroned or at least rethink his policies to perform a true unification of the four nations, which would put an end to a war led by overt blind patriotism and communistic propaganda. If what you claim is indeed true, Avatar Aang, then perhaps the Fire Nation is not what I remember it to be, though I will not falter with my own belief that the four nations can be united as one. Through coexistence the world can achieve peace, but it must be done through respect and diligence, not tyranny and fear. Naruto spoke solemnly, earning a respectful glance from Aang. At least we can agree on that much, but what of Han? You may have to answer for injuring him so. Aang stated softly, a smirk hidden behind Naruto's mask. You honestly think I'd spend time captive awaiting my fate for crippling that moron? I believe my time here is coming to an end, I shall leave by nightfall. Naruto said sternly. Are you sure that's wise? Arna could possibly judge you as an enemy to the tribe. Katara retorted. Then I shall never return here afterwards, simple as that. The sage half lied. Before our conversation ends, I must know something from you, Avatar Aang. You said you disappeared 100 years ago, the exact point and time the war with the Fire Nation commenced. I have heard rumors that the Avatar who arose, which factually speaking is you, is the one who many people view abandoned the world a long time ago. Are such claims true? Naruto spoke adamantly, earning a discomforted, obviously hurt look from Aang. Before Katara could open her mouth to defend her friend, Aang stepped forward softly on his own accord. Yes, it's true. I am the Avatar who fled from his destiny so long ago. As a result, I wasn't present when the Fire Nation launched its campaign against the world 100 years ago. I wasn't there to protect my fellows when they were butchered by Sazin's regime. But despite how people might view me, as a coward or not, I will strive to protect this world, despite how I failed to save it so long ago. Aang stated boldly, slightly surprising Naruto. Naruto looked at the Avatar skeptically before coming to a reasonable judgment on his own. Perhaps it's best that you weren't there to begin with, Avatar. You most likely would have been slaughtered with your fellows, and then your order would have been ultimately extinct. The sage quipped, a look of hurt dissatisfaction quivering up Aang's face. That's not exactly the reassurance he would have wanted to hear from a stranger, but it would have to do. Though, if I may so on, what gave your order the right to announce yourselves as the saviors of this world through each generation? Naruto asked inquisitively, a look of surprise evident on Aang and Katara's face. What do you mean by that? The Avatar replied curiously. Well, I've often heard that the Avatars represented altruism and helping people for the sake of helping people throughout generation upon generation, until your disappearance, mind you. What I can't figure out is why the Avatars exactly crowned themselves to be the messiah of each time they arose from the ashes, that only they and they alone could save the world when they were beckoned to, and everyone else was more or less useless. I don't know, it just seemed really self-entitled to me, something you claim the Fire Nation is currently, which would make you out to be just a tad bit hypocritical. Naruto smirked mockingly, hoping to usher a response from the current savior. The Avatars stand, for the good of the people and helping them in their times of crisis. We take it upon ourselves to be their sword and shield in times of chaos. None of my precursors in any way ever saw themselves as gods. Our role was to assist the people when either a tyrant or even they would threaten the natural balance of things. Aang retorted. I see, but you didn't exactly answer my question, Avatar. I just don't understand how one line of beings can be so important that only they and they only have the power to change the world for the better and no one else can. As I said before, a sense of self-entitlement and hypocrisy is evident here. The sage replied factually. The legacy of my order never once stated that a person who wasn't an Avatar couldn't change the world. It just states that an Avatar is most likely to give an great control of the four elements, which is something I currently lack. Aang admitted regretfully, looking down at his own palms with a feeling of uselessness. And when you do master these elements you believe necessary to defeat the Fire Lord, per se you accomplish your so-called destiny. What will you do? What is necessary upon defeating that man? Naruto questioned casually, earning a puzzled look from Aang. What do you mean? The Avatar responded. By killing him, of course. If what you say about the Fire Nation is true and that man is indeed a tyrant, I can only naturally assume that the populace of the other three nations will want him dead to finally be granted a sense of peace through vengeance for the blood of their fallen. Naruto stated grimly, earning an intense stare from Aang. The Avatar merely shook his head from side to side and gazed upon Naruto's figure with a look of dismay and perhaps regret. I cannot bring myself to claim a person's life. My training as a monk under my old teacher Zhao taught me that it is not within my station to end someone's existence. Taking a life out of revenge is only reserved for the gods. We as mortals must not tread into affairs beyond our own. Besides, killing someone just because they've done harm to others is morally wrong and petty. Naruto couldn't help but sneer at the boy's words, slightly put off by his naivety and innocence. Sometimes we must do what is necessary for the future, regardless if it is within our station as mortals or not. Revenge can be justified under the right reasons. If the target truly is a monstrous person, then their death not only benefits the ones who grieve, but all those who could be affected triumph as well. And even if you truly do defeat this Fire Lord as your destiny states you must, what if your own code of honor prohibits you from doing what is necessary to benefit the entire world? I can only imagine many people would call for his demise, and you, their savior, would deny them that privilege. Your morals about killing could endanger your own life as well, Avatar. Who's to say that the people you saved from Azai's regime wouldn't come after you as well for denying them their pound of flesh? Naruto questioned almost dangerously, a horrified look creeping up both Katara and Aang's face. They wouldn't do that. When Aang saves the world they'd have no right to hate him for sparing Azai. Katara exclaimed vividly. The sage smirked, all too well aware with such innocence. He believed in similar theories as well, but the people of his own past had proved him wrong multiple times. Wouldn't they? Humans can be very vengeful, very hateful beings capable of wishing and often causing harm upon those who would deny them what they want the most. Who's to say that even their savior might suffer such wrath given if he spares the one they seek the destruction of? If your claims about Azai's campaign are indeed true, then I suspect he has taken the lives of many people that most consider precious. What of you, Katara? Considering how long this war has gone on, I can only assume that such violence you reached your own border as well. If so, I can only imagine that the Fire Lord has taken something from your or possibly your family as well. The child of prophecy remarked. Katara's eyes slanted with grim determination, admirable sadness and a sort of intense flare of hatred. It was obvious to Naruto that he had hit a nerve. The Inuit woman fought back the trail of tears that threatened to breach her eyes as Aang attempted to comfort the angered girl by placing his hand on her shoulder. The Fire Nation took something precious to me a long time ago, that much is true. Katara rasped solemnly, granting Naruto's attention even further. Oh? And when you look into the eyes of the then defeated man who had taken something so meaningful to you, could you, or rather would you, forgive him? Would you be content with his imprisonment for the rest of your life, knowing the one who robbed you of what you cherished still lives? The sage asked almost sadly. Katara's fists shook in a sense of audible anger and sadness, conflicting feelings of anger and judgment battling within her. I don't know. See? Letting go of your hatred for the one who wronged you isn't as easy as it seems, is it? Keep that in mind when the time comes to decide Azai's fate. Naruto stated in an almost emotionless sort of voice. We'll do what we must, regardless of our own personal temptations. Aang replied determinedly. Indeed, but I can only imagine a great many will give in to their feeling, rather than suppress them, Avatar. Naruto responded factually, starting to trek away from Aang and Katara as he spoke. The Inuit girl was the first to walk after him, wanting to ask her own question towards the mysterious youth, with Aang following silently in tow. Naruto didn't make it 5 steps before a hand grabbed his cape, to which he turned around slightly to see the curious blue eyes of Katara greeting him. Why did you want to know about how we feel in our fight against the Fire Nation? It's obvious you don't share our feelings completely, but to a degree you seem to agree with us, why so curious? Katara asked inquisitively, as Naruto pulled his cape out from her grip and chuckled lightly. It's always good to know other people's perspectives, even if you don't share them. Individuality is what makes us whole, despite of what conflicts it may bring. I have to disappear for a bit, but don't worry, we'll meet again. Naruto chuckled grimly, disappearing in a shade of white smoke. Katara and Aang's outstretched hands attempted to grab the vanishing figure, but it was too late. The duo looked around for any sign of the sage's whereabouts, but they found none. What a strange man. Katara's thoughts did remain in her own head completely, and Azure Eye meeting with hers from the darkness registered her thought pattern, knowing everything she knew. A fox-like smile hidden in the shadows, ever watching, ever waiting. 7 hours later. Princess Yu stood on a lonely bridge, her blue eyes reflecting against the moonlight. She couldn't help but ponder everything that had occurred in one day alone, and the man who more than had a role in the events that had followed. She had been informed of Naruto's sudden disappearance personally by the Avatar and Sokka's sister, the only 2 people who were there to see the strange youth literally vanish into thin air, much to the disbelief of the nobles. Though she hadn't wished it, a manhunt for the golden-haired teen had ensued shortly after a brief meeting with the nobles of both her own house and Han's entourage, who both came to the decision despite his power and influence on the day's events, Naruto needed to be brought to justice for crippling her fiancé. Han himself, whose wounds had finally been treated to, had nothing more than 2 stumps for hands after the sage had dismembered them without hesitation. She had thought, or had at least wished, that Han would have learned some manner of humility of the brutal experience, but instead he had been off the rest of day shouting bloody murder about how Naruto would be executed for his overwhelming arrogance. You couldn't help but feel it was Han's way of coping after losing his hands, but a sense of disappointment couldn't but be felt considering the sage had done such a thing to teach Han a lesson in respect, something he still apparently lacked. The manhunt had been mainly unsuccessful, with absolutely no trace of Naruto to be found in any corner or cranny of the entire residence of her tribe. It was as if he had truly vanished from existence completely, a shade that was never there to begin with. The dark shadowy essence formed behind the princess to her unknowingness, slowly taking form into the tall, masculine shape of the youth who had vanished. NaruHarem? Arnuk's daughter jumped in surprise, nearly falling off the bridge before her hand was grabbed to maintain her balance. She stared up into the eyes of the man who had been impossible to locate, frightened but happy to see him again. Oh Naruto, you frightened me, you mustn't sneak up on me like that. Where have you been for the rest of the day? Ever since the incident between you and Han, the nobles have been looking for you the entire day. Yu said as she regained her composure. I can only assume they want to punish me for cutting off Han's hands. Naruto shrugged, earning an intensified stare from the princess. But of course, many of the royals cried foul for what you did to Han. While I do feel that Han needed to at least gain some humility for his ego, I do feel you went too far. Yu murmured softly, her gaze taken away from Naruto's. The sage sighed heavily and looked over the bridge at the pale moon, its light reflecting in his blind Viridian eye. The Avatar and Katara proclaimed the same thing, but as I told them I shall tell you, this way Han shall never strike another when their back is turned ever again. Naruto exclaimed. Perhaps I'm just not used to such violence, that's all. Yu replied. After a moment of silence, Naruto turned his head to Yu almost sadly. I apologize if I frightened you with that act, Yu-Haim, it was not my intention to cause you distress. She looked up at him and smiled brightly, his cheeks turning pink underneath his mask in response to her radiant gaze. No, I wasn't frightened, just deeply shocked, that was all. If anything, you only truly frightened me by vanishing for so long. Yu stated calmly, earning a curious look from the tall stranger. Truly? Have I won the princess's favor already? Naruto playfully mocked, earning an embarrassed chuckle from Yu. How could I have possibly thanked you for speaking to my father about my marriage to Han otherwise? If you left then I'd never get the chance to properly express my gratitude. Yu replied honestly. Naruto smirked from behind his mask and Yu turned her in embarrassment at her words, realizing what she had just said. What was to happen to her and Han was still a mystery, she shouldn't have expressed her happiness so freely in such an early casual manner. So the princess does have her own voice after all, your slip of the tongue has revealed your obvious dissatisfaction with Han as a future husband. Naruto chuckled casually as Yu rubbed her temples with her index finger nervously. I shouldn't speak out against my lord Han so freely regardless of his character. Yu swallowed in almost frustrated tone, much to Naruto's delight. I don't even need to try to tell you don't like him very much NaruHarem, though any other reasonable woman would say the same thing about something like Han. If you truly do not care for him, make it known to your father, I'm sure he would be far more accepting now of your opinion, considering he's putting thought into changing the marriage himself. Naruto quipped. Yu sighed lightly, her folded arms returning to her side. Just because my father is thinking on your words doesn't mean that such thoughts will come true, he could pair me up with another man just like Han, Yu murmured. Naruto saw his chance to swoop in and took it, her choice of words being the perfect opportunity to reveal her true feelings. Just like Han, how, exactly? Yu lightly clenched her palm into fists, shaking in aggravated irritation. Short-sighted, egotistical, chauvinistic, over-demanding, compensating, arrogant, ignorant, spineless, lazy coward. Yu spat almost venomously, covering her mouth soon after as Naruto chuckled in response. My, such language from the water princess. I knew you had actual feelings that you had been holding in for so long NaruHarem, you just needed a push in the right direction. Naruto exclaimed proudly. I shouldn't have said such things, Yu murmured. But it's what you feel, isn't it? Why should you have to hide your feelings just because tradition says that you need soft-spoken and obedient? I proved two of this tribe's traditions wrong in just one day, who says you can't be yourself as well? Naruto questioned, Yu dropping her face lightly in a look of thought. I suppose you're right, maybe it is time for me to change. The princess stated softly, looking back at Naruto closely, realizing that his mask still bore the large crack made by her fiancé's blade. Did Han's attempt to attack you injure you, Naruto? I'd hate to be partially responsible for you being injured. Yu declared, caressing Naruto's opaque white mask gently as if it were his face. A contented sigh escaped his lips, her clarity reminded him much of Yuka Hinata, a woman he had come to deeply miss. Clasping her hands gently, the princess let out a soft gasp of surprise, her azure eyes meeting Naruto's functioning and disabled ones. They looked at each other for a moment of understanding before Naruto himself decided to break the ice. NaruHarem, I cannot stay here amongst this tribe anymore. Naruto said sadly, a surprised looking rapidly creeping across Yu's face. What? Why? If it's because of the incident with Han, I can appeal to my father that. The finger pressed itself slowly to her lips, silencing her voice. Well, that may partially be a reason I can no longer stay here, that is not the true reason. I'm sorry, but I cannot disclose the actual reason to you, my Harem. Naruto remarked solemnly, Yu's gaze turning towards a focused confusion. Why not? You can trust me, Naruto, I won't judge you for whatever secret you carry. Yu replied honestly, a grim chuckle escaping the sage's lips. If only I could believe that completely, part of me really wants to, but the other half of me is still doubtful. I'm sorry NaruHarem, but I can't tell you the real reason for why I have to leave, at least not yet. But there is something I can give you before I go. The peculiar youth remarked, pulling out a tri-pronged kunai from his pocket and placing it calmly in Yu's outstretched palm. Keep this by your side NaruHarem, and throw it when you truly need me. I won't be able to come to you as often as I'd like, so only use it in an absolute emergency and I will arrive then on cue. Naruto stated confidently. I don't understand, how is a dagger supposed to have you reach me by just throwing it? Yu asked curiously. All will be revealed in due time, just know that when you do use it, given whatever situation becomes I will protect regardless of any possible danger I may face. Naruto answered assertively, showing an unseen yet comforting protective side Yu had yet to truly experience with any other man. Whatever the situation becomes. Naruto, what's going on? The princess asked worriedly. His face paling behind his already white mask, Naruto turned from the gaze of the princess, not wanting to share eye contact with her any longer. Naruto, wait before you go, can I ask you a favor? Yu asked softly. And what would that be? I will do my best to accommodate you, Harem. The masked man replied. The white-haired beauty stepped in front of her tall friend, looking at his eyes behind the mask that hid his identity. If you are comfortable enough with me, may I see your face before you go? Yu questioned almost painfully politely as Naruto flinched behind his protective barrier. Her words were so like Hinata's before her, how could he possibly say no? Very well, if that is your wish. The sage answered. Naruto clasped his cracked opaque mask ever so slowly, closing his eyes as he did so. A small sigh escaped his lips, the contained feeling that had consumed his face for so long began to rapidly disappear. Yu's continued to widen in curiosity as Naruto's identity was revealed inch by inch, eventually revealing its true self. The eyes of the princess widened not in disgust, but in a sort of astonishment. She blushed ever so slightly, her feminine side almost immediately seeing Naruto's true face as quite handsome in comparison to the men of her own tribe. She was at first slightly disturbed by the rather painful-looking gash that bore itself down across the right side of his face, which obviously was a mark from some past great battle that had taken his sight in the aforementioned eye. His azure eye seemed to shine even more without his mask than it did with it on, a perfect reflection of the endless sea. She couldn't help but notice the peculiar whiskers that shot out from his cheekbones, bearing a peculiar resemblance to an Arctic fox. For some reason, however, Yu couldn't help but look upon with a sense of sadness. The look on his face showed kindness, respect and dignity to it, but there was a certain notion of fatigue behind it. To the casual observer one might have not have seen such emotions, but it seemed far too obvious to her. The hidden feelings behind his face she had grown accustomed to seeing on the tribe's war veterans who had seen their fair share of battle, which had often scarred them to be sad, worn-out old men. To her Naruto didn't exactly seem exhausted, but a sense of tiredness certainly was evident in his face. How long had he been fighting? To her own knowledge Naruto was only a few years older than her, yet he had the look upon him that he had seen enough violence to last a lifetime. She raised her hand over so slowly to Naruto's face, to which he flinched in surprise at first, causing her as well to recoil slightly in response. He eased up almost instantly though, showing a sense of comfort that he trusted her enough to show such familiarity. Yu's silky soft fingers trailed across the rugged scar that shaped its way into the right side of Naruto's face. The sage could feel her touch, even if just barely due to the dead tissue, but with it ranged a sense of nostalgia from his time with Hinata. He closed his blind eye calmly as her fingers stroked down his face elegantly, reveling in her soothing touch. Naruto's own hand had arisen to touch Yu's cheek, to which she stiffened at first, but nearly immediately began to allow. As Naruto's fingers brushed across her own face, her blush intensified to a clearly visible level. The sage grinned softly as he felt her cheeks heat up, his own smile caused her to melt ever so slightly upon seeing his true jubilant face. As their faces neared each other's inch by inch, the duo was unaware that they were being watched. A hidden face amongst the pillars eyed them carefully, but was currently too stunned to make a move. He feared something like this would happen, that Naruto would claim Yu's heart first, and now he was in a too awkward position to even do something. What would he do now? Randomly burst out of seclusion and interrupt what was obviously going to be an intimate moment? No, he was better than that, even if he didn't want to admit it. When Naruto and Yu's noses both practically touched, a silence overtook them both as they stopped for just a moment. Their eyes locked as they looked into each other's very being, an intimacy usually only shared between lovers. As Naruto began to pull away ever so slightly out of doubt, Yu suddenly clasped his face and pulled him into a soft yet passionate kiss. To say the sage was surprised was an understatement. He knew he had managed to teach Yu about expressing her opinions more openly, but he had never dared to think she'd be so bold with her feelings. He could hear Kurama laughing his face off in the back of his head. No doubt the kitsune would wish to antagonize him later about what was currently occurring, but he'd worry about that later. As their lips molded together elegantly, the looming shadow who watched them from afar couldn't help but curse his ill fortune. He didn't want to interrupt the two who were obviously having a moment, but it pained him to see Yu in Naruto's embrace. Sokka wanted to know what that felt like for himself, but now it looked like he'd never get the chance to. When the mysterious stranger and the water princess's lips had finally parted for air, they looked into each other's eyes for a moment of clarity. It was obvious that they had shared intimacy with one another, they were just reconfirming through their eyes. That was Yu stuttered as she tried to catch her breath. Naruto chuckled lightly at Yu's obvious enjoyment of their embrace, looking into sapphire eyes intently. Nice. I hope that was the word you were planning on using, NaruHarem. I'd hate to disappoint you. Backing away from the princess slowly, the sage gazed at Yu with a grim smile, making it all too apparent that now was that time he spoke of. We'll meet again, NaruHarem, that much I can assure you of. When you truly need me, throw that kunai and no matter what the situation, I will protect you. Naruto practically whispered, his visage literally starting to fade away into a spiraling nothing. Yu held out her hand as if to stop him, wanting to know the full truth of what was to come. She would find no answers however, as Naruto's figure disappeared without a trace from her sight. A small clanking sound rattled against the bridge she stood on. Looking down, she had noticed the only thing the youth left behind was his opaque mask, which upon hitting the ground shattered into two separate pieces from the damage it had already received from Han's last-ditch attack. Looking at the dagger with a sense of saddened confusion, the princess held it tightly to her chest, looking over the bridge at the endless sea that seemed to stretch on forever. He said he would protect her when the time came, no matter the situation, but he was not clear on what he would protect her from precisely. Who was it who would threaten her? Someone. Something. And did this invisible force have the potential to endanger more than her, a possible threat to her entire tribe? She dreaded such a possibility, but she did not rule it out as an impossibility. You did not know what Naruto had sworn to protect her from, but he had promised to keep his word regardless. All she could do now have faith that the peculiar but enticing man would live up to his vow. There was nothing left for her to do but simply believe. Sokka, on the other hand, was more perplexed than hopeful, still wondering how the mysterious youth managed to quite literally vanish in the first place. He didn't know of any bending that could do that. More importantly, what had you and Naruto been discussing? Sokka had just barely managed to overhear the blonde say that he would protect you, no matter what would occur in the future, but other than that he had heard little else. Why did Naruto give her some kind of weird-looking dagger? What did he mean by he'd protect her no matter what was to occur? He obviously had to have known about an oncoming danger towards you or possibly the whole tribe, but what was it? Why did he sound so sad, almost regretful even? Sokka didn't know, he could only shake his head in disbelief, trying to ease the burden of so many questions daunting his mind. He would discuss what he had witnessed with Aang and his sister tomorrow, and possibly approach you herself about it if she was willing to converse. All Sokka had convinced himself of was that he needed to only rest for now, but he truly doubted that sleep would erase the mental image of Naruto and Yu's lips molding together. Sighing in weariness, confusion and disappointment, Sokka could only groggily trot off towards his quarters to lay his head down once more, leaving Yu alone and unwatched to stare out at the endless sea. Zhao's vessel, Azula's quarters. A black spiraling vortex suddenly engulfed the right corner of Azula's room, startling the three women present who had just begun to drift off to sleep. Emerging from the dark shroud without anything to cover his face, Naruto's facial features displayed a sense of commitment, hurt, and to a point, disappointment. Ty Lee was quick to jump out of the bed and welcome her returned friends with a compassionate hug and an almost instant barrage of questions relating to his mission. Mai and Azula couldn't help but roll their eyes and chuckle at the pink pajama girl, her enthusiastic tendencies truly knowing no bounds. Greeting his uppity friend commonly with the promise of answering all of her inquiries later, Naruto walked over to the end of Azula's bed with a rather stern expression on his face. "Your mission went well, I assume?" Azula inquired almost lazily. "A little too well, actually. I've observed everything I needed to know about the tribe's defenses, military outposts, vantage standpoints, flanking positions, as well who is and who isn't truly combat ready. The civilian populace I've managed down to a central area. As long as you inform Zhao about our strategic maneuvers as promised, I will participate in this battle, as long as I am not party to a bloodbath." Naruto responded curtly, a devilish grin spreading across Azula's face. "Excellent, most excellent. I must commend you for a job well done once more, Naruto. You truly are quite capable. Then again, I never truly contemplated that you would fail considering your powers. We are ready to launch the invasion tomorrow, I presume?" Azula asked. Crossing his arms diligently, the somewhat reserved sage nodded in agreement. "We are indeed. I take it we, or rather you, shall convey to Zhao what areas are off limits to this fleet's firepower as of tomorrow morning. But of course, it is rather late in the night and I have grown weary of this day out of sheer boredom. I can't imagine he'll be pleased of the possible censorship of what he had originally planned, but he won't question my orders. I'd be the second to last person he'd ever think of defying. A shame that this is the only way you'll participate in this battle. I expected your tendencies from your past to make you a bit more carnal." Azula somewhat ruggedly added, earning a soft glare from Naruto. "There is a time and place for slaughter, and the place you intend on attacking fits neither requirement of absolute decimation. There is another matter at hand as well, NaruHarem, something of grave importance." The sage muttered as his face darkened, a deadly serious look creeping across his face. Her golden eyes narrowing slightly, Azula had come to expect the worst. Truly. Is the Avatar aware of our oncoming siege? For that matter, is he even present at the tribe? He is indeed there, as Zhao's intelligence had come to predict, but he is of no concern to me at this point. His innocence and naivety destroy whatever threat he could truly pose to you or I. He is as unaware of this attack as much as anyone else from the tribe is." Naruto replied almost monotonely. "Then what is the cause of your disturbance then?" the Fire Princess questioned. Sighing heavily, the golden-haired youth grabbed Azula's hand in a surprising motion, lifting her from her bed almost too easily. I hate to ask you to leave your quarters this late at night, Azula, but please understand this situation is much more of a private matter than I'd like. We need to talk about what I've learned alone. Before a certain acrobat could make any childish teasing remarks, she was quickly silenced via a pillow to the face rather assertively by Mai. Naruto couldn't help but shake his head and silently thank the dark girl for thinking quick on her feet, to which Mai nodded in understanding as if saying you're welcome. Letting go of Azula's hand, the princess and the sage treaded down the looping hallways to find a secluded place where they could begin their conversation in peace. After a few minutes passed of opening up every available door to see whether or not said room was occupied, a vacant space finally revealed itself to be some kind of half-full storage closet. It wasn't too crowded and there was at least some space to maneuver, it'd have to do for now. The duo entered the rather compact room and each one took a seat on the nearest box they could find to support themselves. Both had the very small fear that what they were cushioning themselves on could most likely collapse on itself due to their respective weight, but the containers did seem to hold at least some cargo, so balance wasn't an issue here. Looking deep into the man's eyes, Azula couldn't help but feel troubled. There was obviously something on his mind that disturbed him, something that possibly infuriated him somewhat. A look of disappointment, confusion and the mildest hint of anger adorned his face. Twiddling her thumbs lightly, she decided to break the ice. What is it you wish to talk about that is so important we'd have to discuss it in private like this? I do not exactly care for being dragged in a storage room for a chat, I can assure of that much at least. The sage was silent for a moment, contemplating his words carefully. He knew the very topic could cause controversy amongst any inhabitant of the current High no Kuni, even more so with royals themselves. But it had to be addressed, whether he liked it or not. You have some explaining to do, Azula. End chapter. So this part ends here. If you want to see next part of this series, like the video now and share the story with your friends. Bye bye.